Hi all, I'm just going to awkwardly vamp for you, well, because there's lots of you today coming into the space. Lots and lots. Well, welcome everyone to today's event as part of our Fringe Exchange and our virtual Fringe Central programme. It's so great to see everyone here. This event is run today by our lovely friends at ISPA. One thing that I'm very excited about today is just one, seeing how many names that I'm already recognising from across the past 3 weeks, but also the fact we're genuinely crossing so many timelines and so many different countries in this call today, so it feels incredibly Fringe. So my name's Alan. I'm the registration manager at the Fringe Society, kind of / Zoom MC for the next little while. So as you're all coming in, if I could just ask everyone to just keep microphone on mute. It's nice if your video's on if you feel comfortable with that. We are recording it as a resource for later, but it's nice to be able to see everyone's faces. And if everyone can just stay on mute until you're the one speaking, just so as we can keep track of everyone, because as I say, there are lots and lots of us today. I just wanted to do a really brief bit of housekeeping before we get going. So as much as I've said, like, oh, mute your microphones, it would still be really lovely to hear from you and hear that Fringe community loud and proud. So in the chat function, which I'm sure everyone knows by now, but it's just to the left of center, please just a quick hello or a where in the world you're joining us from. It's just a really nice time to see who all is with us today. I'm going to admit another bunch of people. And then also at a later point, we're going to have time for questions after we go into breakout rooms. So in the chat, if you've got any questions at all, if you put a capital Q at the start of it, it just helps me find it in the chat at that point, so as I can help facilitate that Q&A for us. Finally, the best BSL interpreters in the land. Who cares about impartiality now? Greg, who is on my right, I don't know where he'll be on your screen, and also Rachel, who will be tag teaming with Greg throughout the event. If you are using the BSL service, you can just find them. They're both listed as BSL interpreter in the participants section of Zoom. So you can pin them to your screen so as they can be full screen for you, so you don't have to strain your eyes at all to see them. Also, we're going to be going into breakout rooms at some point, which will be randomly assigned for you. But if you are using the service, if you could message me, so you can find me at Fringe Society, Alan Gordon, and just let me know you're using the service, I can make sure you end up in the right room with Greg and Rachel. I think that's more than enough from me though, so I would love to throw to the Chief Exec of the Edinburgh Festival Fringe Society, Shona McCarthy.
Hello everyone. I can't tell you how much joy it brings to me to see your gorgeous faces. I only wish that we were together in the same room and not looking at each other across these screens, but still brings enormous joy to see you all here. It's been such an amazing experiment to transfer some of our activities into the digital space this year. It's never going to be the same as live. We all know that. You're all smiling as I say that because we all desperately miss live performance. But at the Fringe Society, we wanted to ensure that even in a year without live Fringe, that we could keep this wonderful festival and our creatives and artists in the hearts and minds of audiences, of the performers themselves, and also of our international colleagues and partners. So as Alan says, we've taken our Fringe Central services, our support centre for artists, into the digital space. Amy's here and has led us in taking our marketplace side of the Fringe into the digital space, and it's been wonderful to see still those international showcases from around the world, and people and programmers and curators coming still to look at work even in the digital space. We've also had our Fringe Pick and Mix and our Friday night live shows and our listings of all of those companies and venues who have still taken to digital platforms to put on Fringe shows this year. So we've done our best to keep it live in the hearts and minds, and it's all been one big wonderful experiment. I think this format in particular, Fringe Central and the Fringe Marketplace, are going to be real legacy projects for us. So there are things that we will take forward as we move into a kind of more hybrid future. But one of my kind of greatest pleasures every year is to work with ISPA, to work with the wonderful David Beale, and to really create in the Fringe space a continuation of those wonderful conversations that get started at ISPA in New York and then continued again at the second conference throughout the year. So a great pleasure, even in the digital space, to continue to work in our partnership with ISPA. And I'd like to hand you over to David Beale to introduce our wonderful speakers today. And I will see you all later.
Great, thanks so much, Shona. Believe it or not, I'm having a bit of audio problems. So while I understand you can hear me, I can't hear you. Nora has graciously turned up the volume on her computer, so I'm sort of listening remotely, but catching kind of every second word. It's funny, we have these Zoom meetings like 6 times a day, and this is the one I want to actually hear. While we are meeting virtually, I do want to take the time to humbly acknowledge that the ISPA office and the team are joining you from the traditional territory of the Lenape people. Echoing Shona, I'm delighted that we're able to continue our partnership with the Fringe this year, despite not being able to come together in Edinburgh. This is the 4th year of the program, and I want to thank Shona and her team, as well as the ISPA team, for working together so seamlessly to bring us together. Before we begin, I did also want to let everyone know that our usual ISPA convening that Shona actually referenced in New York in January will be held virtually from January 11th to 15th. We're really excited about this new platform and hope you'll join us. We'll be launching registration on September 22nd. It is now with great pleasure that I welcome Santi Smith, Managing Artistic Director of Kahawi Dance Theatre, and Yaron Lifshitz, the Artistic Director of Circa, to the ISPA series of the Fringe. I'd like to turn it over to Santi, who will be facilitating today's discussion. Santi?
Spego, Skanagoga, Santi Smith, Dagalunyakwa, Nyungyats, Gongwahoi, Ganyangahaga. Greetings to you all. It's nice to see some familiar and smiling faces. Happy to be joining from my home here on Six Nations of the Grand River Territory in Turtle Island, also known as Canada. As David mentioned, I'm the artistic director of Kahawi Dance Theatre, which is an Indigenous performing arts company based in Six Nations in Toronto. So Nyawe ISPA for inviting me to facilitate this conversation on courage. Courage in the times we're facing when our lives and our plans have radically shifted and the world is on a dramatic pause and the earth is full schooling us on our interconnectivity and our interdependence. Our lives have changed. Life is change. Change, courage, creativity, intricately interwoven. As artistic leaders, we tend to feed creativity and not our fears, which brings me to introduce the fearless leader and the provocateur of the day or the hour, Yaron Lifshitz. Yaron is currently the artistic director of Circa and Contemporary Circus Company in Brisbane, Australia. Many of you may know of him and his work and have spoken with him at previous ISPAs. He has directed over 60 productions, including opera, theater, physical theater, and many large-scale events. His work has been seen in 40 countries and across 6 continents by over 1 million people. A prolific creative and director, experienced at touring the world and engaging audiences. Yaron's work is the embodiment of courage, what courage looks like in action. Yaron will be challenging us to meet today's challenges. And from Yaron's provocation, we will move to assigned breakout rooms, as Alan mentioned, and we'll get a chance to come back and have a conversation and reflection together. So please welcome Yaron.
Thank you. Thank you, Santi, and thank you to the ISPA and the Fringe Society. It's very odd not to be in Edinburgh in August, so thanks for bringing a little bit of Edinburgh to my late evening here in Brisbane. Now, of all the speeches that I've ever prepared, this has been by far the most difficult. Delivering a provocation at this moment is a bit like giving a swimming lesson while trying not to drown. What can I really say? Look for the sky, swim towards it, hold your breath, and have courage. Beyond that, I know as little as anyone else. I do have a question. Are we more afraid that things won't return to the way they were, or that they will? In my darker moments, I have wondered, was March 11, 2020 the high point of our species? Maybe after this date, it's all downhill. Disease, fascism, climate change, most of the horsemen seem to have arrived. But let us remember that the word apocalypse doesn't mean catastrophic ending, but rather revelation. Literally, it means to uncover. Several years ago, I asked in an essay, can circus, the bright-eyed, firm-bodied art form of heroic strength and achievement, meaningfully speak to audiences of the perils and loss that we as a civilization face? I am an artist who usually creates in the key of collapse. And over the past years, from a position of privilege, I have created work that foretold of the ends of things. Il Ritorno was a circus reimagining of Monteverdi's opera Il Ritorno di Lise in Patria, told through the lens of the displaced. And as we entered technical rehearsals for the world premiere at Brisbane Festival, that horrendous photo of Alan Kurdi, the Syrian child washed up near Turkey, appeared in the news. When we toured the show sometime later to Southern California, the large wall that constitutes our set so moved our predominantly Latino crew that they put stickers of flags on its back in solidarity. For them, it wasn't the 17th century. This was a piece about a border wall today. When we created Opus, the Debussy String Quartet, indulged my whim and learned to play Shostakovich's Eighth Quartet, that magnificent threnody to the victims of fascism, separated on stage, blindfolded, seated as if for an execution. They were no longer playing in Lyon or even in Stalingrad, but they became for a few moments everybody who was imperiled by their belief, tossed on the seas of history. When I made En Masse, I put an ensemble of acrobats into a plastic bubble. I confronted them with the music of Schubert, as if they had survived a global catastrophe, but what had been lost was the culture that could help them make sense of it. Then in March 2020, our world fell apart. Reality bounded past my imagination. We were faced with a sudden catastrophic collapse of the world we knew, and everyone's work stopped. Our entire sector ground to a halt. Overnight, we became voiceless, audienceless, and often incomeless. Much to my surprise, my response was optimism. When the world turns profoundly weird and non-linear, the shortest distance between 2 points just might be a poem. According to Anne Carson, if prose is a house, poetry is a man on fire running quite fast through it. Things may not make sense or be predictable, but there are plenty of us on fire running quite fast. In this time, I've turned often and hard to the wisdom of poets, writers, and philosophers. And they have pointed me in the direction of where up might be. Now, usually for me, perhaps as a Jew, definitely as an artist, it starts with a question. As James Baldwin said, the purpose of art is to lay bare the questions that have been hidden by the answers. And the question of the moment is, for me, and probably for many of us, what do we do now? Today, right now, Circa is loading our show Leviathan into a theatre in Brisbane. That's amazing. In a week, our cast of 45 will present 8 sold-out performances to physically distanced audiences, but 50% houses. This makes us incredibly, unspeakably lucky. For this moment, our borders are shut, but our theatres are open. And yet we know, despite all the protocols and hand sanitisation, that we're only one cough away from not going on stage. A single outbreak, God forbid, closes us all. There's no guarantee between me speaking these words and our first audience that will still be there on stage. And the emotions here are extreme. There is guilt. Why are our friends in Melbourne and New York unable to do the same? Why do we have jobs and opportunities while others lack them? There is hope and relief. There is fear of loss, of causing damage, of censure. And there is the deep burn of meaning we access because we are able to perform again. All these emotions coexist and are real. Optimism, I've come to realize, isn't relief at being back on stage, that's happiness. And it isn't blindness. I don't believe everything will be all right, and I certainly don't want to go back to the world as it was. Around us is pain and loss, but also creativity, care, and love. Optimism, I've learned through this experience, is a choice. It's the story we choose to tell. It's the narrative we use to connect the dots of reality. And the story I found myself telling is this: we are here, we are in action, and there is hope. As Gerhard Richter says, art is the highest form of hope. When COVID stopped us in our tracks, I spoke to our team. I said, this crisis demands each of us gives our best every day. And I think we've all seen so much of the best of so many in our sector. Artists teaching classes, holding Zooms, having discussions, trying side hustles, making things happen. And so many visionary producers and organizations rethinking the foundations of their practices, offering services, engaging, reimagining, helping. We all need more, and we need to advocate for that together. But we also need the courage to act now. There are those who have rolled over and are suckling at the pacifiers of their past entitlement, waiting for the nanny of government to come and just give them more. I think if we have a space and we don't fill it with an artist, a show, a soup kitchen, an installation, or an idea, that's not our best. If we have research that can sell a ticket or connect a community and we don't make it available, if we have people and we haven't done everything we can to guide, protect, and retain them, if we have an idea and we hold on to it rather than let it find its way into the world, if we let difficulty grind us into inaction, if we fool ourselves into thinking there will be days off or shortcuts or stones that it's okay to leave unturned, then that is not our best. And these days they demand the best of us every day. I find it incredible, frankly, that we at Circa have projects that we can deliver almost anywhere in the world right now. It can be performed at almost any level of COVID restriction. And yet it's difficult to find the structures nimble enough to get these projects to audiences. To those who are locked into business models that are old-fashioned, inflexible, and out of date. To those who lack the resources or the will or the buy-in of stakeholders to transform inertia into momentum, I say now is our moment. Evolution's lesson is clear. Those who cannot adapt will not survive. We all have a choice. We can remain dinosaurs or evolve into birds. We can grow wings or become fossils. And like many of you, I have no intention of ending up as an exhibit in someone's glass case of what arts companies once looked like. At Circa, as our tours ground to a halt, we leapt into action. And last month alone, we were fortunate enough to find paths to audiences in Brisbane, the Gold Coast, and in Austria. In Austria, in Graz, Werner and his team from La Strada premiered a new COVID-era Circa creation called Cube Studies. 30 audience per performance, each in their own opera box alone, each with a sliver of salt and a cube of handmade chocolate. Each watched a performance painstakingly created over weeks of Zooms by me and my team, staged with and on local artists. Around 1,000 audience members had an exquisite, authentic taste of live performance. Werner had the courage and creativity to embrace new ways of thinking. He got on and made something happen. Bob Dylan said, "You don't need to be a weatherman to know which way the wind blows." For the arts, it's blowing into an unsettling and unknowable future. Those who stand still will be left behind. Are you more afraid that things won't return to the way they were before COVID, or that they will? At Circa, this crisis has been a moment for us to take stock, to renew our commitment to and vastly expand our actions on First Nations engagement, work with community and groups with special needs, people who experience disadvantages. We've leased additional spaces, engaged artists and cultural planners from the communities, trialed new programs and created new opportunities. We've got a long way to go and there's a lot more we can do. But for now, our classes are full. Every seat we've had on sale has been sold. Our workshop places are oversubscribed. And we've been lucky enough to be able to provide hundreds of hours of free workshops to young artists and at-need groups through the generosity of donors and clients. None of this is business as usual. Let's call it business as unusual, disruptive, challenging, and confusing. Poetry, said Robert Frost, is what gets lost in translation. Theatre is what gets lost when you remove dramatic stories from the live experience. That empathy of breath, the moment of encounter, the gasp that ripples across 1,000 people in the same nanosecond. How to achieve this when you can't put people in seats close together facing a stage is clearly exceptionally difficult. It requires creativity, it demands passion, and it isn't always going to work. That's what we do. We find creative solutions. We try and fail again, and we try and fail and try again and fail better, as Beckett famously said. We're used to making magic with far too little. It sounds kind of like another day in the office in the arts. We are magnificently well suited to this crisis, being creative, resilient, and committed. We are also still here. The best way not to drown is to keep swimming. The world has changed, and I asked you to consider if you were more afraid of it returning to what it was before, or of it not returning to what it was before. In truth, we have no choice. Some things will be the same, and some will have changed irrevocably. As leaders, this is our moment, and it will take courage. Mark Twain said that courage is resistance to fear, mastery of fear, not absence of fear. Showing up each day and trying to figure our way through the mess is an act of courage. The mind-numbing complexity of today reads as a poem, not an email. There is no motto to this and no theme. History doesn't repeat itself, but it might rhyme. The philosopher Jacques Derrida once said, "If things were simple, word would have gotten around." It hasn't, because they aren't. But we're still here, and some kind of world will exist at the end of this. And those with the courage and good fortune to stay in action will have played a role in creating it. Derrida describes how the new is always seen as a monster. A monster, he writes, is a species for which we do not yet have a name. It looks like a hallucination. It strikes the eye. It frightens precisely because no anticipation had prepared one to identify this figure. For a Tyrannosaurus rex, a sparrow would have been a monster. The world we are facing will be full of them, but they're ours to imagine and create. We can't wait this out. We just have to lead through it. If on February 11th this year, any of us had tried to predict what the rest of 2020 would have looked like, we would have been completely wrong. If we try to predict what would happen the next month, we would have been wrong. So instead of predicting the future, let's create it. Let's ensure that we make a bright future lit with the light of pluralism, diversity, tolerance, care, and compassion. As Viktor Frankl said, what is to give light must endure burning. We are all in some sense running through the house of these poetic days on fire, but to focus on this is to miss the point. What is incredible is that we are still in the house, that in the arts so many of us have stayed on, are working through it, surviving, pivoting, doing what it takes to keep sharing the light of our creativity and effort. Dostoevsky said that beauty will save the world. I am thankful that we have the chance to prove him right. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Yaron. I'll just give a little response. It was March 10th that my professional world came to an abrupt full stop, 24 hours before flying out to Washington, D.C. to do the last stop of our Mushhole tour. And my awareness of the coronavirus was actually sitting at the JFK airport, leaving and returning home from ISPA, New York, when they announced that the first flights, direct flights for Wuhan were coming in, and the concern of the rising spread of the virus. And in February, I was tracking the virus at my residency at the Banff Center for the Arts and Creativity, and thinking about how the tourist town of Banff and the cultural hub of the International Arts Center was potentially already being impacted by an invisible virus. And fast forward a few months later, and institutions like the Banff Center are dealing with extraordinary choices to make. And luckily, creativity is a part of that. And artists at home isolating in Zooms, as you mentioned. And with all the turmoil of today, I am glad that your response to the uncertainty is optimism. I'm right there with you on running on fire or not, with optimism and hope and resilience, and having the courage to act. And as a body and a storyteller, whether I'm moving buto slow or being catapulted through the air, it's embracing these dynamic shifts that makes the work exciting. And as artists, we're always in the state of becoming, living in the unknown. And I agree with you that creative leaders, this is our moment to find creative solutions. And creativity is precisely how we survive. And COVID-19 does not discriminate. Yes, we are all swimming, but as much as we're in this all together, we are poignantly aware of the vulnerable people within our communities and glaring systemic inequities that persist. I think it's important to acknowledge that some of us have been swimming for a very long time in shark-infested waters, or in waters that have been commodified and sold around us. For me, creating the future also means looking at foundational values. My ancient Haudenosaunee values that come into play during global pandemics of COVID and racism are fairness, sharing, honesty, kindness, consistency, integrity, responsibility, responsiveness, and cooperation. So Nyala for your words. And now we'll move into our breakout groups, and you can discuss further and reflect further on the words and the sharing of today. And I'll leave it to Alan to inform us more about that. But also to, when you're in your groups, to reflect on some of the questions that were posed. And I'll just reframe those. Are you more afraid that things will return to the way they were before COVID, or that they will? What do we do now? How are we being responsive and adaptive? And how is optimism and courage guiding us into action? Yeah.